Here's a model answer to a question about the effects of hyperinflation on Germany in 1923. Remember, the new specification is putting more emphasis on the middle of the 1920s, which is why I'm producing this podcast for you now. We'll just pull back and see the big picture. The question could come up as a short question worth 9 marks, or it could come up as a longer question worth 12 marks or even 16 marks. So the amount of detail you put into the answer will depend on the actual question. The key things though are the introduction and those opening paragraphs, opening sentences of each of the paragraphs, and the conclusion, and then the information on the right, the points in bold. That's the precise information you can bring in to develop your key points. So we'll zoom in as usual, and I'll take you through the key points for this particular question. Okay, so notice the introduction. It's about Germany in 1923. Just a single sentence will do. The question is about impact. It's about the effects of hyperinflation. So a good thing to do in the introduction is to say there were a range of different types of effects. Some were positive, some were negative, some were social effects, some were political effects. So point out the different types of consequence. Okay, this is a history exam, so using the correct terminology and showing you understand different types of consequence will score you marks. Okay, so you then get into the key points that you want to put across. Just pull back a little bit so you can see there are 4 key points. Just get a sense of what those key points are. In paragraph 2, the first key point is you're defining what the hyperinflation was. Secondly, you are in the next paragraph you're focusing on the negative impact, the way it hit people badly, and then in the third paragraph you're balancing it on the other hand by saying that some people actually benefited. There were also political consequences, so that's what you go into in the final ones. The first 3 paragraphs explaining what the hyperinflation was and focusing on the social consequences, and then the final paragraph you're talking about the political consequences. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. First of all, what was the hyperinflation, that paragraph? Point out that before 1923 prices were going up. Okay, that's inflation, when prices going up. It wasn't a new problem. It had been happening for several years, ever since the end of World War One. In fact, during World War One, prices were going up. Why was that? The prices go up because there is too much money. And when you've got too much money, it loses its value, which is why prices go up. And during World War One and at the end of World War One, the government was printing too much money, partly to pay for World War One, but also to pay for reparations after World War One. Now, what then happened in January 1923 is the French occupied the Ruhr because Germany stopped paying reparations, and the French seized the goods that were produced in this was the biggest industrial region of Germany. The Germans responded with passive resistance. They basically went on strike. The factories stopped producing. As a result, there was a shortage of goods and there was reduced income for Germany. And so the government responded by printing more money. Now, they'd been printing too much money anyway, even before 1923, but with the French invasion of the Ruhr and printing even more money, it made the existing inflation worse, which turned inflation into hyperinflation, which was literally prices rising so rapidly they went through the roof. And by November 1923, there were 4 billion marks to the dollar. You learn that statistic. It's really important to back this up with a statistic. So that's an explanation of what the hyperinflation was and what caused it. You then move into paragraph 3, and what you're doing here is you're focusing in on the negative impact that the people who suffered. Now basically the key point is focusing on the middle classes, particularly small businessmen, because they had savings. Savings were wiped out. Okay, if you'd invested, say, 5,000 marks, maybe a life savings, suddenly 5,000 marks won't even buy you a loaf of bread. So effectively, the savings became worthless. Pensioners, of course, their savings are called pensions. And so they were badly hit. People who basically had been saving up for a pension fund, particularly if it was a fixed pension, that pension fund lost its value overnight. So pensioners were particularly badly hit. People who relied on wages were also hit. Wages did go up. Okay, that's important to understand. But they rose slower than prices, so there was a lag. So as a result, employers tried to deal with this by paying workers twice a day, so they could shop earlier in the day before prices went up. But on the whole, people on wages suffered as well. So that paragraph focuses on the negative. You then do a paragraph that focuses, that gets the balance. Some people actually benefited. It helped some people. Farmers in particular benefited. They had been struggling, but the rise in food prices helped them. People in employment generally, people who were on wages, as say, because wages went up as well, although there was a lag, as we just mentioned. And big businesses did well, because they had borrowed money from the banks, and it's the opposite. Savings were wiped out, but debts were wiped out as well. So if you had borrowed money and you owed, say, 5,000 marks, well, suddenly what you owed was worth nothing. So effectively, people who borrowed money heavily, and that was particularly big businessmen, benefited. Generally, the rich benefited because they had land and they had possessions, so they could always fall back on their property. So there were a whole range of people who benefited. Now finally, to get the balance, because so far all you've talked about is the social and economic consequences, point out there were political consequences. Okay, so the people who lost out, and we've just explained who they were, in particular the middle classes, tended to turn to the extreme right-wing parties such as the Nazis. So the Nazis, their increased support, Hitler noticed that, he could, and that explains why the timing of the Munich Purge. Hitler chose November 1923 because he realised that a lot of people were blaming the Berlin government for their miserable economic situation. So the timing of the Munich Purge was decided by the hyperinflation. The other political consequence, though, is that the Berlin government recovered the initiative. They took strong action, and Stresemann appeared. Although he was foreign minister for most of the time, he was briefly the chancellor, and he was the chancellor at the end of 1923. And of course he introduced a new currency called the Rentenmark, whose value was not based on gold reserves, but it was based on a mortgage of Germany's industrial and agricultural resources. It was only a temporary currency, and the following year it was converted back to the Reichsmark, which was backed with gold. But the point is that the people had confidence in the new currency, and so therefore the hyperinflation was stabilised and the economy recovered. So in your conclusion, sum up those key points. So you can read the conclusion there. It impacted negatively on many people. Some groups did, though, benefited, so you get the balance. Talk about the short-term rise in right-wing extremism. That was a political consequence, but by the end of 1923 the government had recovered the initiative. Okay, so all the material is there for you to write a good answer to that particular question. Hope that was helpful to you.